It was tricky trying to think about what to talk about today, the first of the beginning of the new year. And it's pretty traditional, really, at the beginning of the year to renew precepts. Now, I like to do the precepts every time we come together, but in some traditions, they do ceremonial recitation of the precepts, the hommages and precepts. So I thought today that I would take some time just to talk about renewal and opening to the five precepts, the Buddha's guidelines really for simplifying our lives. And so the questions I asked myself were, what in challenging times keeps the mind alert and buoyant and the heart hopeful and generous? And the Buddha actually suggested move into the future with confidence. I don't know where I saw that, but I thought that was good, especially in these times, things are pretty uncertain. And, learning the Dharma means understanding the Buddha's teachings and continually reflecting on them in light of our daily lives. And in a broad sense, this process is what it's like to really walk the Buddha's path. And so let's walk into the future, establishing healthy relationships with people around us by renewing our aspirations and opening to the precepts that the Buddha taught us. The idea of living one's Dharma, it's historically meant that a person lives in a way that's in accordance with the laws of nature. One of the translations of Dhamma is the law or the truth, nature. And it can be considered a person's purpose, guiding their actions and decisions to live fulfilling and meaningful lives. And the path to self-realization through Dharma involves aligning our actions and choices with our deepest values and purpose, leading to a greater understanding of the true self. And this idea of understanding is important. If we do good, good will be returned to us. If we indulge in unskillful actions, we will be responsible for the consequences. And this means the principle of karma is guided upon earth by the force of the truth or of Dharma. And through karma, we practice and preserve the light of the truth, that Dharma. Among the very first teachings that the Buddha offered to his students that would really provide the foundation for the entirety of the Buddhist training were the guidelines for harmonious living. And those are the five precepts. The Buddha knew that applying them to our thoughts, our words, our actions every day, no matter how challenging they might be, is a definite way to improve our lives by helping to resolve much of the emotional struggle and stress that cloud the mind. The precepts are integral to the Buddhist path. The Buddhist path of practice is called the Noble Eightfold Path. And it guides the practice of sila or virtue alongside the development of mental discipline of meditation. And it also includes the clarity of wisdom. It's divided into these sections of virtue and meditation and wisdom. So even when we don't feel ready to meditate or take on other aspects of the Buddhist practice, we can begin with the precepts and see positive changes in our circumstances and state of mind right away. Choosing to follow the precepts is a decision. It's a commitment to refrain from certain things we know to be harmful to others and to ourselves. We arouse the energy to undertake this training based on our understanding. And contrary to possible fears that this will be burdensome and difficult, we can often find it to be just the opposite. The strength and energy of our commitment to the precepts brings a feeling of joy and confidence, walking into the future with confidence. We don't get so carried away by old habits, or we don't continually waver about actions that we know are unskillful, but still continue to do. When we consider our thoughts and words and actions, then every living situation can be part of the practice. We can be living the practice. And additionally, the precepts are a way of making a safe container for ourselves and for others around us to practice in. We are making certain ethical agreements to live in harmony with each other during this time period. The precepts can become alive for us as we pay attention to them daily. The first step in this practice, taking refuge in the Buddha, might be approached on various levels. And we can choose the way that's most meaningful to our particular temperament. Some might want to take refuge in the historical Gautama Buddha, the human being who attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree over 2,600 years ago. It doesn't mean that we're worshiping the man who became enlightened or setting him up as a being higher than ourselves, but bowing and honoring the Buddha nature that already exists within us. For instance, when the Buddha encountered Mara, which can be viewed as extreme negative mind states, when he was under the Bodhi tree, especially in his last hours, and he encountered Mara, all these extreme mental states, he felt fear. The same painfully constricted throat, chest, and belly, the same racing heart that we experience when fear strikes our heart. By willingly meeting fear with his full attention, the Buddha discovered fearlessness, the open, clear awareness that recognizes the arising and passing of fear without either contracting or identifying with it. Taking refuge in the truth of his awakening can inspire us on our own path toward fearlessness. Paying homage can give us the intention of gratitude as we acknowledge where the teachings came from. As His Holiness the 16th Gyula Karamapa said, if you have 100% dedication and confidence in the teachings, then every living situation can be part of the practice. You can be living the practice instead of just doing it. The enlightenment factor of rapture or intense interest is born from freedom from remorse that comes from practicing the precepts and non-harming, and the increasing momentum of awareness that comes from sustained, balanced energy. Rapture is the quality of intense interest, and it arises from close and caring attention to whatever is arising. So as we do the simple practice of attending to the breath or attending to what arises, it can create a kind of concentration, and from that concentration, this rapture can arise because we're having intense interest, paying attention to it. So I like to think of the precepts, considering them as like an ethical North Star. I was reading this really interesting article last year on the Five Buddhist Precepts for modern times. And it had different contributors: Rebecca Lee, TRUDY GOODMAN, THANISSARO BHIKKHU, Jan Willis, and Sister True Dedication. And in this, complex, interconnected world, living ethically has Never been more challenging, really, or more important. And so I thought I'd share some of their comments. The first precept of non-harming is simplified into don't kill. So Jan Wallace talks about this one, and Jan Wallace is a professor of religion. What's it called when it's not emerita? She retired at Wesleyan University, and she's also a visiting professor at Agnes Scott College, and she studied with Tibetan Buddhists in India and Nepal, Switzerland, and her work explores meditation, women in Buddhism and race. And her most recent book is Dharma Matters, Women, Race, and Tantra. And she's mentioning in it one of my favorite verses in the Dhammapada, verse 183. And it's really succinct in the summations of the Buddha Dharma. That verse says, do no harm, practice virtue, discipline the mind. These are the teachings of all the Buddhas. These three, not causing harm to oneself or others, practicing what is good and wholesome for oneself and others, and disciplining one's mind in order to accomplish the first two activities, are Buddhism in a nutshell. Compassion, non-violence, and non-harm are the heart of the Buddhist practice. And it seems fitting then that sort of an enumeration of the general ethical guidelines for Buddhist lay followers, the 5 precepts or the 5 trainings, begins with an injunction to refrain from causing harm, from killing or taking life. It might seem that undertaking that kind of a vow not to kill would be easy for most of it, but this isn't the case. In many ways, it's the hardest of all the precepts. In Buddhism, actions, karma, are of 3 sorts. They are committed by our bodies, by speech, or by mind. And in order to think and act virtuously, our mind is key. Our motivations and our physical actions begin in the mind. And the mind's actions are faster. I'm sure you've figured that out. The mind can do things a lot faster than the body. Jan Wallace also mentioned, say we get angry with someone. We might become so furious that we want to harm them. Now, if we were to pick up a knife or a gun, find that person, and aim the gun, or figure out how to get close enough to use our knife to stab them, well, that would take some time. But in a flash in our mind, we may have killed that person 100 times over or caused them harm immediately. Owing to our motivation, having thought violence is as much a violation of the precept against killing as having done it physically. The incredible speed of the mind is why it's so important to discipline our mind. If we can restrain our mind, we can cause less harm and perform more actions that are beneficial for all concerned. Shantideva in The Way of the Bodhisattva says that without disciplined mental restraint, without patience, or our anger can destroy in an instant all the virtuous activity we have performed in 1,000 eons. Oh boy, that's a hard bar. That kind of hurts. I think I'll say that again. Without disciplined mental restraint, without patience, our anger can destroy in an instant all the virtuous activity we have performed in 1,000 eons. Why? Because anger, unlike righteous indignation or simple frustration, wishes only to cause harm to another. It's solely a destructive force. Therefore, to undertake the practice of the first precept is to step upon the Buddha's path with earnest. Now we're sort of distinguishing between anger, the real force of movement of anger, as opposed to, as he was saying, righteous indignation or frustration, agitation. Those are all much more subtle mind states, not as gross as the one of anger. And that's a lot to think about, that how quickly the mind can go into anger. And I'm sure all of us have plenty of anger that happens plenty of the time. Luckily, we keep developing patience. We keep holding ourselves in kindness, but doing no harm. Undertaking the training of doing no harm. It's a training. The second one is not taking what isn't given to us. Rebecca Lee talks about this in that article. Rebecca is the founder and guiding teacher of a Sangha Dharma community, and she's a sociology professor and lives with her husband in New Jersey. She's the author of Allow Joy into Our Hearts, Chan Practice in Uncertain Times, and her latest book is Illumination, A Guide to the Buddhist Method of No Method. So she mentions that precepts are often viewed as restrictions on our freedom. And in reality, they're our best friends in the practice of cultivating wisdom and compassion. The second Buddhist precept is not to take what isn't given to us, not to steal. And it's different than like thinking about the commandments, because it's a living training. It's something that we're embodying. And as we live in the world that celebrates wealth and fame, it's easy to be tempted by shortcuts to success, acceptance, or recognition. Sometimes these shortcuts involve taking what is not given, stealing. Blinded by our greed for acknowledgement and achievement and all that comes with it, we convince ourselves that these shortcuts are okay. The precepts acts as a friend who asks us, are you sure you want to do that? What about the precept of not stealing? This gentle reminder provides an opportunity to cultivate clear awareness of our craving and our greed, and to stop the mental agitation that arises from convincing ourselves that we're not harming anyone, or that the end justifies the means. And to end the suffering caused by erroneous views. We can choose not to suffer ourselves by letting go of craving. And that choice reflects wisdom. And likewise, we choose to refrain from harming others by not stealing. And that choice reflects compassion. Rebecca Lee in the article mentioned contemporary life provides numerous opportunities to practice upholding the second precept. When we take money and material things, we can readily recognize this as a form of stealing. But what about presenting someone else's work, knowledge, or idea as if it were your own in order to appear more intelligent and productive? This can be a tempting shortcut to gain influence and achieve success. We try to convince ourselves that no one is getting hurt when we take undue credit. But is that really true? It can help someone's career when they are recognized for their intelligence or contributions. By taking credit for another's work, we are stealing that from them. And we may convince ourselves that the person doesn't mind because they're not complaining. Yet our actions put them in an untenable position. By complaining, they risk being seen as petty, especially if they're members of a less powerful group, women or minorities, or someone in a subordinate position, like a student or an employee. As a result, they are hurt twice, first by losing the recognition due to them, and second by being silenced or misunderstood if they stand up for themselves. So that's why I made sure in my talk that I gave credit to everyone whose paragraphs I learned something from and didn't claim it for my own. She says, not stealing is in accordance with wisdom and compassion. Properly acknowledging other people's work is compassionate behavior because it makes them feel appreciated and seen. Recognizing that our accomplishments are the coming together of many causes and conditions, including work done by others, is wisdom. In this subtle way, upholding the precept of not stealing frees us from suffering. This reminds me of an incident that happened with me and one of my teachers, where she told me one time that another Dharma teacher had asked for her talk, and would she give it to her? And she gave her the talk. And then later on, she heard the talk, and it was verbatim her talk, but she was never given any credit for the talk. She never said that it came from her teacher. And it really bothered her because, it sort of points out, and this was within the Dharma world where we try to be as conscientious as we can about the precepts. So, these are subtleties when you talk about things at work and stuff like that, but it's really important to, really honor everyone's accomplishments and recognition due to them. And it's generosity and respect on our parts. And then there's those times that you go to Cloud Mountain and you're at a retreat and they have 50 pens in a cup, and they're there for us to take. But can I take home 10 so that I can give them to other people, or shall I just take one? And those are given to us. Well, so now we have the third one. TRUDY GOODMAN is talking about this one. And in case you don't know TRUDY, she's the founder and guiding teacher of Insight LA. And she practiced Zen and Vipassana since 1974. And she's trained extensively in psychotherapy and mindfulness-based stress reduction. She taught with John Kabat-Zinn, the originator, and she was co-founder of the original Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy, which is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the first center in the world that's dedicated to these two disciplines of meditation and psychology. She teaches retreats and workshops nationwide. And she's also the partner of Jack Kornfield from Spirit Rock Meditation Center. So she's talking about the third precept, which is about exploitation or harming others sexually. Like, don't stereotype or exploit or harm others sexually. She mentions a story I'd like to repeat. She says that many years ago, during a 3-month meditation retreat, and this is pretty interesting because if any of you have ever sat with monks and you try to ask them any question about the third precepts, you get into trouble in some way or another. So during this 3-month retreat meditation, this visiting Burmese meditation master was asked the question about sex. And as a monk, because they're taught this, as a monk, he responded, sex is gross, base, and disgusting. The Buddha was clear that while sexuality is an enjoyment for married householders, the rules are different from monastics who take vows of celibacy. And so they had a gathering at the end of the 3-month retreat that they call the Dharma Follies. And they do these funny skits performed at the end of the retreat. And so in that presentation, the monk's answer was humorously adapted for lay people. Sex is engrossing, basic, and worth discussing. That's pretty good for gross, base, and disgusting. It's engrossing, basic, and worth discussing. Yes, sex can be a delightful way to get to know yourself and others. Knowing and being known, loving and being loved. Most people long for this. The third precept extends the overarching principles of integrity and non-harming to the powerful energies of sex. The precept for lay people is a vow not to engage in sexual misconduct. But unlike the precepts against killing or stealing, it's not so clear exactly what constitutes sexual misconduct. I know when I'm in my integrity, my wholeness, there's respect for my body and another's, and even in the force field of sexual desire. But if we view people as sex objects or through gender stereotypes, we've fallen into disrespectful dualism that dims the light of awareness. Objectifying or othering each other opens a door to exploitive behavior and abuse. Exploiting anyone's vulnerability in sex for our own pleasure takes us far away from our true nature. For whenever we harm another, knowingly or unknowingly, we are harming ourselves. TRUDY mentions without mindful awareness, it's easy to rationalize and indulge in sexual behaviors we know to be harmful by pretending they aren't really so bad, or by deciding it's okay this one time. When we start going down this path, it's time to take a moment to check in, to breathe deeply, and call in some loving awareness. Pause and ask yourself, is it wise to take the next step? Sex is a big deal. How much time do you spend wanting, wondering, fantasizing, even obsessing about it? It takes willingness and courage to move past fear of the unknown, fear of being known, painful or traumatic sexual experiences and cultural sexual inhibitions to explore this territory. It takes practice to handle the heat of erotic fire skillfully. TRUDY also says shifting from having sex to being inside the sexual experience, either by myself or with another, is powerful intimacy. In Zen, it's said that true love is when the division between self and other disappears. We find that passionate, heart-opening presence when the third precept is kept with love and care. And for me, learning to navigate sexual relationships wisely has been the work of a lifetime, full of joys and sorrows when I enjoy the pleasure and happiness of my sexual partner as well as my own. That joy aligns me with my Buddha nature, and it's heart-opening. All the factors of awakening, joy, energy, interest, mindfulness, relaxation, concentration, spaciousness, they all come into play in that intense space of sexual connection. So it's non-harming, not doing anything that is exploiting another person. So now we have the fourth one, tell the truth. THANISSARO BHIKKHU is contributing to this one, and he's a monk in the Thai forest tradition. After moving to Thailand and studying under the forest master Achan Phang Judiko for 10 years, he returned to the United States and he co-founded the Metta Forest Monastery. Some people in our Sangha who aren't here right now have gone down there for weeks at a time. And he also comes up here. He comes to Portland Friends of the Dhamma once or sometimes twice a year. He's the translator for numerous suttas and classical texts, and one of his books is The Four Noble Truths. And his books and many other teachings and translations can be found online at his dharmatalks.org, and also his website, which I use religiously. I use a lot for reference, is called Access to Insight. And there's tons of information. And he translates lots of suttas and publishes them. So he mentions that the very first Dharma lesson that the Buddha gave to his son was never to tell a deliberate lie, even in jest. In another context, he added that if a person feels no shame telling a deliberate lie, there's no evil that person will not do. Obviously, the Buddha saw the precept against lying as crucial to goodness of any sort. He defined telling a lie as deliberately misrepresenting the truth. You did X, but you say that you didn't. You didn't see Y, but you say that you did. Many people, when they learn of this definition, immediately look for two possibilities of exceptions. What about jokes? This is a tough one, where you exaggerate the truth, but without intending to deceive your listener. What about lies told with compassionate motives, such as wanting to protect people from truths they're not ready to hear, or to protect people from danger? The Buddha's first lesson to his son explicitly rules out the first exception. The teaching he gave after the lesson helps explain why. The practice of training the mind is a matter of becoming increasingly sensitive to your actions in thought, word, and deed, to the intentions of motivating them, and to the results that they yield. If you see anything unskillful in your actions, you do your best to abandon it. This practice requires not only sensitivity, but it also requires rigorous honesty. If you're careless in how you frame your words to others, it's easy to be careless in how you view your intentions and the results of what you've done. You keep turning a blind eye to currents in the mind that you'd rather not see. To counteract this tendency, you have to be rigorously true in everything you say, even when looking for ways to express your sense of humor. Try to find it in the truth. There's plenty of it there. I recently, do any of you know who Josh Johnson is? Oh, he's a fantastic comedian. Josh Johnson. Not a hard name to remember. Look him up. He actually is the first comedian, I think, that I feel does this. He finds the truth, and he turns that into storytelling in a way that is so humorous, and then it also he also turns it back sort of into lessons to learn, or lessons that he's learned. So he recently started his second nationwide tour. He just ended it with 16 shows in Portland. And now he's starting again. His next tour is called the Flower Tour. His first one was the freshman tour. His second one was the sophomore tour. And his third one is the Flower Tour. And you look at his Instagram or his YouTube videos, you'll see short segments and long segments of some really amazing way of talking about the truth in a humorous manner. Up until this time, I thought, it's really impossible to tell any kind of jokes unless it's a knock-knock joke, where is it going to be making fun of anyone? So there's also social consequences to like little white lies. When people found out that you've told them a lie, no matter how compassionate you thought it was, they'll never really trust your words again. And when trust is broken, the relationship is wounded. And when little lies become acceptable, bigger ones become more widely acceptable. And society as a whole begins to break down. We see this regularly in our whole political structure these days, as we might be seeing happening today. THANISSARO Bhikkhu suggests that when you want to avoid sensitive topics, and you find this in monks when you have conversations with monks a lot, When you want to avoid sensitive topics, learn how to be quick-witted in getting around them without misrepresenting the facts. It's a better exercise of your discernment to stick with the precepts in a harmless way than to justify breaking them. So the last one is don't consume toxins, or it's more softly put, don't indulge in substances that will cloud the mind. So this was suggested by Sister True Dedication. And Sister True Dedication is ordained and works as a journalist for the BBC and News in London. She edits books by Thich Nhat Hanh, including Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet and the Art of Living. And she's ordained under Thich Nhat Hanh. So Thich Nhat Hanh did something unusual with a lot of things, but in the five precepts, he turned it into what he called the 5 mindfulness trainings. Actually, there's 14 mindfulness trainings, but the 5 mindfulness trainings of the 5 precepts are his modern take on the 5 traditional Buddhist precepts. And they're a journey of training in right action, the kind of action that responds to the suffering of our times. And Thai, as he's known to his students, has expanded the 5th precept, which is traditionally understood as refraining from drinking alcohol and taking drugs that cloud the mind. And he turned it into a deeper training in mindfulness consuming, mindful consuming. The 5th mindfulness training zeroes in on the hundreds of choices that we make every day about what to eat, what to drink, what to watch, what to listen to. It includes the kind of environment we choose to immerse ourselves in and the kinds of dreams and intentions we nurture to draw us forward through life. All of these can be considered as nutriments for the body. They can be healthy or they can be toxic. The 5th mindfulness training is about actively seeking out those things that are healthy for our body and mind and consciously avoiding what is toxic. In Buddhism, there is such a thing as free will. Mindfulness sets us free to choose in any given moment what we eat and drink, what we see on our screens, and what kind of life ultimately we want to live. We get to choose what to do with our minutes, our hours, our days. We get to choose how to handle what's arising in our body and our mind. Mindfulness also leads us to a deeper, radical honesty about the effects of every kind of input on our body, mind, spirit, and on the planet. Does what we are watching, reading, listening to, consuming help all of us be healthy, happy, and whole? Mindfulness allows us to ask why we're reaching out so much to consume, to open the fridge, switch on a streaming channel, or pick up our phone. And it's only human to cover up painful feelings of loneliness, fear, and despair with a bit of distraction and stimulation. But as practitioners, we know that covering up our suffering with consumption may only make the situation worse. When we do that, we lose the chance to take care of the feelings that are there. And we may introduce even more negativity into our lives. Consuming mindfully is an art, not a strict regimen. It's up to each of us to discern what's healthy and what's not, guided by our own insight of inner being and compassion. For each person, it's different. There are no hard and fast rules for mindful consuming. It's up to us to identify with the energy of mindfulness, whether what we're consuming feeds our compassion, our hope, and action, or whether it waters seeds of fear and despair. Our body is the body of the earth the body of society. And we want to take care of it with love and respect, just like we want to take care of our planet and fellow citizens with love and respect. And this empowering insight transforms our simple everyday choices into a dynamic realm of meaningful action. I want to end with the notion that ethics and precepts are also practiced mostly in relation with other people. The foundation of the path is establishing healthy relationships with people around us, Dharma relationships. Relationships inform us, these relationships, the Dharma relationships, inform us the deep contemplative practice that we do in a more solitary way. And we're not just doing our practice for ourselves, we're also doing it in a field of other people. So let's just take a few moments and let the words settle down. Thank you for listening to the Dhamma. May it bring you joy in your life. And if you are so inclined, let's go over the precepts together on that sheet of paper. And I'm going to share something for you online. You can look at the chant sheet and participate in the recitation if you feel to. No pressure if you don't want to. And you might want to just read along and consider some of them. And let's say them together. Let me find the one that I brought up for you online. I know it's there. I wonder if I erased it already or made it disappear. I hope not. Nope, here it is. Now, I think since it's just you and I here, Will, and several people on Zoom, I'm going to sing the Pali. I'm going to chant the Pali, and the people online can chant the Pali. And then I would like you to read 1A, the English part. And then I'd like somebody to chime up online and unmute to read the next part, the sort of aspiration part. Okay, so I better turn yours down, I think. Let's see. I'm turning yours down. Let's see. Okay. Panatipata we ramani sikapadam samadhiyami.
I undertake the rule of training to refrain from taking the life of another living being.
Okay, I'm going to call on somebody. Sandra.
I aspire to be kind and of service to all beings.
Anadinada we ramani sikapadam samadhiyami.
I undertake the rule of training to refrain from taking that which is not freely given.
Jill, can you see it?
I aspire to become generous to all beings.
Kame sumichachara we ramani sikapadam samadhiyami.
I undertake the rule of training to refrain from sexual acts which cause harm.
I aspire to nurture love, relationship, and beauty.
Musawada Vairamani Sikapadang Samadhiyami.
I undertake the rule of training to refrain from false and harmful speech.
How about you, James?
I aspire to use speech to create happiness, harmony, and understanding.
Surya Mirya Maja Pamada Tana Vairamani Sikapadang Samadhiyami.
I undertake the rule of training to refrain from the use of intoxicants.
Jill?
Okay.
I aspire to cultivate mindfulness and wisdom.
Thank you, Vicky. So now I'm just going to chant it all through in Pali because it's so nice to hear. And if you want to chant it with me, do. Adina Dana Vairamani Sikapadang Samadhiyami Kame Sumicha Charya Vairamani Sikapadang Samadhiyami Musawada Vairamani Sikapadang Samadhiyami Surya Mirya Maja Pamadatana Vairamani Sikapadang Samadhiyami. And there's one last verse that isn't on here. Idam me silang maga palanyana sa pachayo hotu. May you find ways of appreciating the precepts. If we want to stay a couple extra minutes and listen to each other, I had a thought of, is there one precept that stands out for you that you feel would be worthy of working with in daily life? Took myself off of spotlight for all. And I'll just let you see if anything comes up on those precepts.
Can you send us a copy of that over email? The precept?
I can, and I can also drop it in the chat box for now. Do you want to look at it now? Hang on a minute. Let me find it. Oh, I might have closed it.
Just on the email
Okay.
would be good for us.
All right. Well, I'm not going to do that now. Is that okay? I'll just remind you. Refrain from taking the life of any living being. Refrain from taking that which isn't given. Refrain from sexual acts that cause harm. Refrain from false and harmful speech. Refrain from the use of intoxicants. So I'm going to stop the recording and we can continue the discussion. I'm going to pause it.